Welcome back to week 2 here at the Accenture studio. I'm really delighted to be joined by a great audience here, but also, as I understand it, several thousand people who are joining us online, and we will be recording the session as well for many more. Last week, I think it's fair to say that we made real progress on net zero. I think in governments there was a lot to celebrate, even in the area of biodiversity, but certainly I think in terms of some of the progress made in finance, some of the progress made in coal, some of the progress made, for example, in the convergence of standards and standards bodies into a single ESG body to hold companies accountable for disclosure and reporting. However, I think today's discussion and opening this second week with a conversation on biodiversity is incredibly important, and I think exactly the right thing to be doing. So I'm delighted to be joined by some fantastic guests. No nature really means no societies, no livelihoods, no business. It's that simple. That's why at COP26 we're bringing leaders and experts together here today to start the conversation now on how we can work together to shift the current economic system to be more nature positive, because every sector has a critical role to play, and only moving in sync can we hope to turn the tide. But also, equally importantly, taking action now to integrate nature into decision-making and our value definitions themselves is an absolute imperative. At COP26, we've heard a lot about the climate crisis, but it's almost impossible to disentangle the crisis that's taking place with climate change with the broader environmental crisis that I think we all believe is looming and is possibly even more dramatic and even more irreversible. The decline of biodiversity that we've experienced over the past 5 decades. And I won't cite the numbers, but there are myriad different scientific studies that have been done, studies by think tanks and NGOs like WWF, that show we really have a problem. We really have a problem, and it needs to be tackled now. These twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss are inextricably linked. We can't solve one without the other. Climate change is one of the most critical drivers of biodiversity loss, along with others such as pollution and loss of habitat. At the start of this session, we asked some of our early joiners and some of those who'd already registered a very simple question, which is, what does nature give you? And here are some of their responses, I believe we can have available. So let me move out the way so you can see some of them. So you can see happiness, peace, food, freedom, relaxation, well-being, tranquility, enjoyment. I think what's very, very clear to me is that nature, wildlife, biodiversity plays an important role in all of our lives. I remember personally being asked one of the toughest questions I've ever been asked, and being very surprised by how difficult it was to answer this, by Tenzi Whelan, who some of you may know used to run the Rainforest Alliance. And we were sat having a coffee one day, and she said to me, "Why do you care about nature? Why have you decided to dedicate your career?" And it really stumped me. It sort of really put me on the spot, and I sort of thought to myself, okay, well, I can give her the normal answer, which is, well, because it's good for business, it's good for the planet, it's good for... And then I stopped and thought, okay, well, those are all true, but the real issue for me is I grew up on a farm in the southwest of England, and I was surrounded by nature every day. and really it had a profound impact on me. And I think it has a profound impact on many of our lives. As you can see from the responses, nature plays an important role in all of our lives, for our sustenance, for our mental and physical well-being, for cultural identity and heritage, for the products we use and consume every day. Our reliance on nature is abundantly clear. And this isn't just an environmental crisis, just to be clear. It's an economic one. The World Economic Forum estimates that 44 trillion, that's more than half of the world's total GDP, is dependent on our natural capital and ecosystem. So what can we do? Well, recently in the UK, we had something called the Dasgupta report that was commissioned by the UK government to look into the economics of biodiversity. And Dasgupta concluded that the solution starts with understanding and accepting a simple truth. Our economies are embedded within nature, not external to it. The Prince of Wales has been using this concept for the last 20 years. He talks about living off of the net interest of nature, not eating into the capital. And Marissa from Credit Suisse, I'm sure, later will talk to us about that. But that is a fundamental issue for us. And the Dasgupta report also showed that investing in nature was a 5-to-1 return. So based on that research we conducted as a part of our recently launched Get Nature Positive campaign, or at least, I would say the UK government and the Council for Sustainable Businesses Get Nature Positive campaign that Accenture was very proud to be able to support. What we know is that action is lagging due to a lack of common framework and standards. So how would I describe it? I would say businesses don't know where to start on the journey to nature positivity. And I'm not sure that they've really yet fully absorbed what biodiversity gives to them and what the portfolio of different options they have to take action are. And so what we did with the Get Nature Positive campaign was to produce not just the campaign, but a handbook that has practical advice, that has case studies and actions that business can take today. We need business leaders to think more deeply about their relationship with nature and take action on biodiversity loss before it's too late. The private sector has a critical role to play as a catalyst for other sectors. We need to reimagine how we interact, use, and protect nature by bringing nature to the center of business strategy and decision-making. So it's with that backdrop and background that I have a huge amount of pleasure in welcoming Enrique Sala to the stage. Enrique is a conservationist and explorer in residence for the National Geographic, as well as the author of The Nature of Nature, Why We Need the Wild, the founder of Pristine Seas, recently an Earthshot Prize finalist, but also one of my best friends. Yeah. So, Enrique.
Thank you for having me.
It is genuinely a pleasure, as always. Getting a chance to talk to your friends about something that matters as much as this is always going to be a pleasure. So, tell us first of all, biodiversity and the book. So Klaus Schwab at the WEF has encouraged every business leader to read your book, which is a pretty, and pay for it. But on a serious note, because actually I think there is still a lack of understanding of, one, what really biodiversity means for business. Can you say a little more about that for us, just to kick off, to understand why it matters, what biodiversity in business means?
Well, I think you have already said everything I wanted to say in your introduction and that beautiful video that you had. But, there is still this, as you said, the economy is embedded within nature, right? And in economic schools, they still teach the concept of externalities, which is such a stupid concept. Like, nature is something that is out there, right? And what now even business leaders understand, and not every business leader is like you or Marisa, right? Understand that the economy is a construct of humanity. And humanity is part of the biosphere, which is that thin living layer on the surface of our planet. And we cannot produce oxygen. Bacteria and algae in the ocean, the forest, produce it for us, right? And thanks to them, we can actually live on this planet. We cannot produce, well, we are starting to produce our own food, but based on plants and animals. So everything we depend to survive, everything we need to survive depends on the job of other species. Yeah. And what we have seen is that the more species there are, the more biodiversity, actually the more benefits we obtain, right? So there will be no business. There are no businesses on the moon. There is no biosphere on the moon. It's as simple as that.
Well, I think it's I remember the phrase that Prince Charles used as well, which is that the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment, right?
Exactly.
And nature and biodiversity, which I also like. I mean, so tell us, I get all of that. What would you pick out as 2 or 3 themes in the book that if you were to be sat in a boardroom with a group of a CEO and CFO, CMO, COO, you know, that hadn't really got their head around biodiversity. And actually, I can tell you, still from our CEO study that we just conducted with 1,200, you've seen the results, still only 21% of CEOs that we spoke to told us they thought biodiversity was a risk for their business, whereas I think the number's 100%, right? But what would you say to them? What are the 3 things they need to know?
Well, one is that there is no long-term profitability for any company in the world, no matter the sector, if we continue eating away that natural capital, right? That's number one. Number 2 is that you better feel the pulse of your customers because there is increasing demand. People are fed up with the corporate greed, right, and short-termism. And the third one is that, you know, again, a reminder that, you know, there is this new study that came up this week estimating that the assets of the fossil fuel companies are going to drop in value 50% in the next 9 years or so, right? So, you know, if you're planning to be the CEO and get your bonuses and have a golden retirement, you know, as when you live in 5 years, fine. But, you know, you're going to be living in a world that is going to be so unlikable and unlivable that even you know, living on your isolated life, you know, you're not going to be able to enjoy the planet as we have today. And
Ulrich, this week is obviously climate change in principle, right? This is you know why we're here. We're here for for the net zero target. Here for 1.5 degrees. We're here to try and tackle climate change. But I know both of us believe this. But I think you cannot disentangle biodiversity from climate change. I was asking our team. I heard a stat. And I can't find out where the stat was from, but that only 54% of climate change can be tackled directly through the energy system. The rest is through biodiversity. And don't quote me on that because the team have told me they can't find that stat anywhere. But I'm sure that stat is about right. But how we almost artificially pulled these two things apart.
Yes.
I mean, they clearly aren't. They're clearly part of the same conversation, right?
No, absolutely. Because if we want to get to net zero, right? By 2050, we need to do 2 things. Yeah. One is to reduce our carbon emissions to almost zero by 2050. That means, well, we need at least to decline the emissions by half every decade. Right? Yeah. But the other half of the solution is to suck up the excess carbon pollution in the air and the water. Because the CO2, the carbon dioxide that we have in the atmosphere, a molecule of carbon dioxide can be in the atmosphere for 1,000 years. So even if we stopped emitting carbon right now, we still have 414 ppms of carbon, of CO2 in the atmosphere. This is enough to continue warming the planet forever, right? So who's going to suck up that excess carbon pollution? It's not this illusion of the technology that doesn't exist. You know? If you read Bill Gates' book, it's all about if we get the technology. Then if we are able to build 50,000 capture plants around the world, and if the carbon price gets to at least $100, then we will be able to suck up whatever gigatons, etc. fine, but we don't have the time for this. But we do have the technology. It's called trees, forests, wetlands, mangroves, healthy ocean ecosystems. The only technology available on the planet today to suck up the excess carbon pollution is nature. The problem is that we don't have enough nature left. Nature cannot absorb our impacts anymore. We have transformed 75% of the inhabitable land. We have fished over half of the ocean. So this is why we need, if we want to really get to net zero, we need half of our planet in its natural state. That's what the science is saying. And we can start by protecting at least 30% of the planet by 2030 and restoring much of our degraded land. That's the only way we're going to get to net zero.
And so that would be through things like rewilding, that would be through things like, so for example, one of the things that I should have said, or at least I could have said, is that although Enrique is an activist and a positive activist, he's also a professor. And professor, I don't know if you're still at the University of California, but certainly been at the University of California, so someone who really understands, in particular, oceans. And I mean, just incredible work with oceans. 22 of the largest marine reserves on the planet, and an area of 5.8 million square kilometres. That's due to Enrique's work, and I'm not joking. It really is his pristine seas work. It's absolutely incredible. So what do we need, given that's your real expertise in the area? I know you're broadening it out to other areas. What do we need to do with the oceans in particular to help restore and regenerate?
So on the land, there is the Trillion Trees Project, right? And you can plant trees, but in the ocean, we cannot replant the ocean. The best way for to restore the ocean is to let the ocean restore itself. And we have seen this all over the world. The main threat to marine life today is overfishing. Right? And climate change, global warming is getting worse and worse. But historically, it's been overfishing. And what we know is that when we close an area from fishing completely, marine life bounces back, and the abundance of fish increases 600%.
I mean, if you haven't seen I think you've done 6 National Geographic films now. Is it 6 or more than that?
Oh, no, 30.
30, okay, sorry. Okay, well, he gave me an iron key with 6 on, which I watched with my kids. And it is absolutely incredible, the results. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, no, nature is amazing. Especially, the ocean has this ability to bounce back. It's faster than on the land. Right. So 600% recovery. You tell me one stock that will give you that return, right? Yeah. If you manage fisheries, so the fish were this abundant before, right? With all these centuries of fishing, now more species are here, right? And now you can do the best fisheries management, and you will recover the stocks to here, right? If your baseline is 1987 or 1995, oh yeah, we have recovered the stocks, our fisheries management works. Yeah, but that's the syndrome of the shifting baselines, right? We don't know what was really natural. But what these marine reserves, where there is no fishing, no drilling, no mining, what they do is to bring back the abundance to here. We've seen places go, I have seen places go, and done the science and everything, from degraded to pristine. Places where the biggest fish was like this, now has these schools of groupers, like in Cabo Pulmo in Mexico. Sharks, it's extraordinary. But we need to give the ocean the space and the time, and today only 8% of the ocean is protected. We need at least 30% by 2030.
And one of the things that I love, I don't know if you can see in the background, the Kintsugi art installation by our friend Roxana. I love the art concept of Kintsugi, which, if you haven't come across it, is the idea of broken pottery and broken sculptures being able to be built back stronger and made more beautiful, even as a result of this. And you've shown that in action with some of these incredible marine environments that you've been able to contribute to and help governments to set up. As I understand it, you've just come back from a recent Pristine Seas project and trip. And I think there's some pictures that folks are going to show, and maybe, I don't know if they should show them for you.
Perfect.
But do you want to talk a little bit about your recent expedition? By the way, my wife on a regular basis asks me, when are you getting me on as a volunteer on one of she's a biologist by training. When are you getting me on one of Enrique's trips as a helper?
Spring 2022. Spring 2022. So, I was a professor at the story, but I was a professor at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography in California, and I was studying the impacts of humans in the ocean, and I realized that I was just writing the obituary of the ocean. Right? I wasn't helped to heal it. So I quit, and I decided to work on conservation. full time. So I went to National Geographic and founded the Pristine Seas Project to work with governments and communities to create these marine reserves. In 2009, we went to a place called the Southern Line Islands, belonging to the Republic of Kiribati, which is this country in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And we found the most pristine coral reefs, full of sharks, and 80% of the bottom was covered by live coral. Just as a comparison, today the Caribbean has less than 10% coral cover, right? We're talking about 80%. And we got it protected in 2014. We thought, we saved this place. Right? But then in 2016, the Pacific Ocean saw the strongest El Nino, the strongest warming event ever, killing all these corals throughout the Pacific. These are the dead corals of that pristine place. Half of the corals died. And we thought, wow, even the most pristine coral reefs are doomed. But I thought, well, if there is one place that can come back, it's this one, because the fish abundance is off the charts. This place is really pristine. So if biodiversity provides resilience, this is the place to test it. Yeah. So I said, oh, let's go back 5 years after the warming event. Let's give the reef some time and let's see what happened. And we were then in October, we just came back. That's the same reef. It came back completely.
This is almost the Kintsugi.
Completely.
Of
and
coral reef.
And the species that are taking over now are different, but the reef has recovered. Why? Because there is no fishing. There is no pollution. And the fish, there are so many fish that they keep cleaning, grazing, and they kept the reef clean so the corals could regrow, right? You don't have that in most places in the Caribbean or around the world. So that really gave me some hope and shows that it is protection of nature, biodiversity, that provides resilience to warming.
I think that's a fantastic segue into our next speaker. So thank you very much, Enric.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
For all you do.
Thank you. And let me invite up now Divi Valiente. So please do come up to the stage. Divi, thank you very much for joining us. I know that you had to change your travel plans. As a former resident of Costa Rica and having visited Panama many, many times.
Amazing.
I think it's great to see you here because I have seen some of the impacts of what you've been facing. But let me introduce you properly. So Divi is Valiente means brave anyway, so it's a good start, I think, from a sustainability activist, but is a proud member of the Guna indigenous peoples of Panama. And Gunayala was one of the first indigenous territories in Latin America to be displaced by climate change. And as a result, you've dedicated most of your career to raising awareness of these issues, both nationally in Panama and internationally. And you're the head of sustainability affairs in Panama, as well as a One Young World ambassador, and as well as an advocate within the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals program around ocean conservation and the protection of indigenous people's heritage. So, Divi, I'll leave the stage to you, but please do tell us a little bit more, because it's really important to hear your voice, I think.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for giving us this platform to tell us a little bit of what's happening in Panama and in so many other communities around the world. I think that we have forgotten where we come from. Even though humanity has been made easy to travel to every corner of the world, and we have developed innovative technologies and built expensive megacities, still 56% of the world's population live in urban settings, divorced from nature. I was very lucky to grow up in this amazing land called Gunayala. It's located in the Caribbean coast of Panama, a set of 365 beautiful islands with sand the color of white eggs and crystal clear water. However, these islands where we produce zero carbon footprint are the most affected by climate change. Yes, thank you. When I was a kid, there wasn't plastic around my island. Everything we produced was organic, and somehow what you call now circular economy was the way my ancestors have lived for centuries. What you call sustainability is the way we interact with nature every day. Still, we are the most affected because of climate change. We represent the first case of an indigenous group in Latin America that is forced to leave their island, forget their lifestyle, find another way of living because of something we didn't cause, climate change. I was very lucky when I was 19 years old to travel to Switzerland to study international business and hotel and restaurant management. And there, I faced a very different lifestyle and a very different concept of the world. I was studying about very expensive hotels in Dubai with walls made out of gold and rooms that cost around $50,000 per night. But also, I discovered that through indigenous knowledge and our traditions, we had a huge opportunity to create economic activities that can impact positively not only the communities, but also the ecosystems that we value at heart. For us, nature is our mother, and the ocean is our grandmother. And the same way that our mothers and grandmothers take care of us, we take care of nature and the ocean. These are the beautiful islands where I come from, and as you can see, they are not taller than a meter. So every centimeter of water increase in the ocean affects us very heavily. This is a photo taken in the beautiful islands where I come from, and you can see how this island has almost disappeared. We have an amazing opportunity right now to take advantage of indigenous knowledge. We have the power to unleash technology, art, media, enterprise, the private sector, business, and work together with ancestral knowledge that has been developed over centuries by my great-grandparents so that we can find innovative solutions to climate change. I'm sure that climate change is real. I am living it. And even though you might not see the effects of your actions on a daily basis, there are hundreds of thousands of people that are being affected every day. In my lifetime, my islands are going to disappear. In 2014, I was chosen to represent Panama at the One Young World Conference in Dublin, in Ireland. And I was chosen because of the work I was doing at the time to give access to drinking water to local communities and to work together with university students to teach them what entrepreneurship was. And even those were the most important topics for me in 2014, when I went to Dublin and I heard from Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland, that climate change and climate action and climate justice were very important topics for the conference, I started looking after what climate was doing in my communities and in my islands. And it was in Ireland that I discovered that we were the first documented case of an indigenous group forced to move because of climate change. Imagine, I had to travel the whole ocean to discover that we were the most affected. Since then, I took as a personal mission to make awareness of climate change and to inspire action. Because if I, a person that studied in Switzerland, a person that has been heavily involved in social and environmental activism, didn't know what climate change was, what could we expect from the communities that have no access to internet and have a very traditional lifestyle where CO2 is not emitted? Therefore, I started using art as a means to inspire action on climate change and to make awareness of it. So I worked together with different artists from different means of art, from painting to photography to theater, music, storytelling, and we work together with the kids. Our project is called Burwigan, which means children in my own language, Dulegaya, the language that the Kuna people speak. And through art, we teach them what effects climate change is going to have in our communities and how we can actively look for solutions towards it. I believe that even though science has been there for decades, scientists have been telling us climate change is real. 97% of the science agree that climate change is caused by humans. There are many people that believe it's not real. And in some communities, people still think that climate change is something that the gods are sending us to punish. They don't know that climate change is produced by the biggest countries in the world, by the biggest corporations. And now I ask myself, how do we tell people they have to abandon their islands? And who should be responsible for funding these movements? I might not have the answers now, but I'm pretty sure that we all together in our own path of life can try to find a solution for this. It's a fact that our islands are going to disappear. It's a fact that our culture has to evolve and has to adapt. We have done this for centuries. We can do it. But I'm afraid that if we lose our islands and if we lose our culture, a lot of ancestral knowledge is going to disappear with it. So let's work all together. Let's work all together so that even though I lose my islands, the knowledge of my great-grandmother still exists forever. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
I'm sure your grandmother, I don't know if she's still alive or not, will be.
She is alive.
She must be incredibly proud of you.
Thank you very much.
I think it's both a very stark warning to all of us, but I think you should be incredibly proud of what you've dedicated your life to in terms of bringing art, bringing culture, bringing that message to people as one of the most impacted cultures. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Please,
Thank you very much.
I think one thing that Divi, I think, is aware of, but I find incredibly powerful, is that I think we all believe that biodiversity is intrinsically important, but also incredibly important for the economy. And just 5% of indigenous peoples around the world are responsible for being the stewards for 80% of biodiversity. 5%. And in many of the cases, we're now seeing those communities having to leave their homes forever. So the stewards, and I think about clients like ours, like Natura, who, for example, are coming up with new ways and means to actually reward indigenous people with biodiversity contracts where they're sourcing from nature. There are creative ways and solutions, I think, for businesses to work with people like Divi and others, not just to raise awareness, but to come up with concrete ways to ensure that that stewardship continues. So Divi, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate it. Now, on that theme of action, I think what we want is to have everybody signing up to, I think the whole philosophy of this physical and digital format that we've chosen at Accenture, trying to be as inclusive as possible. Divi has been able to be here with us, but there are so many people around the world who can't be here. So we've tried to take a digital-first approach as a bridge around the world to make sure people who wanted to be here, who couldn't be here, or actually just simply shouldn't be here from an emissions perspective, or couldn't be here from a cost perspective, that they have the chance to join in. And this Get Nature Positive campaign, it's time to act now. You can check this out online. It's incredibly practical. As I mentioned earlier, it has a handbook, it has very, very practical case studies, a set of actions that you can take as a board to raise that understanding and awareness, to make sure that it's possible for people to truly... Has that gone? Oh, that's gone. that it's possible for people to act and to be concrete about that. So I'd invite everybody who's watching, and I would invite everybody who is, oh, there we go. Sorry, it was on my screen, but not on your screen. It's time to act now. And will you join us in making nature everyone's business? That's certainly the real philosophy and goal behind today's session. So getnaturepositive.com. Please do visit that. Please do think about what you could be doing differently. So with that, I'd like to invite to the panel, I think we're going to add some chairs, and if folks would like to join me from our panel, Marco van der Rieve from the Nature Conservancy, Marissa Drew from Credit Suisse, Daniel Schmidt from SAP. I'm not sure why you do or don't get a scarf, but there you go. I'm sure there's one available for anyone who wants one afterwards. Thank you very much. So I think that's a very tough act to follow in terms of how powerful and meaningful I think Divi's intervention was. But I think this conference and what we're trying to do is to think about action, trying to think about what it means in practice, what it means in tangible things that governments, businesses, and others can do. But this particular panel very much on the business side of things. Let me just tee up the conversation that I hope we're going to have today. So we know that addressing climate and biodiversity requires a transformation of economies and societies. And we've heard very, very clearly from the scientists this morning, the activists, people whose lives and livelihoods are being put at risk, that we can't treat those two things separately, that biodiversity needs to be put on an equal footing with climate change, and in many cases is completely integrated in terms of both the problems and the solutions. I'll give you a couple of stats. So some of you are aware we, every 2 to 3 years, conduct the world's largest CEO study for the UN Secretary General. We've done that now, it ages me a little bit, but I've done that now for 14 years. But it does give us a good chance to build up longitudinal data on how CEOs' attitudes are evolving and how they are changing. And I'll give you two interesting stats, which I think are challenging, but hopefully we can find some opportunity in this. Only 18% of CEOs coming into COP said that their governments and policymakers had given them the clarity needed to meet their sustainability targets. Right? So I think that shows there is a lot more that's still needed from government, from the private sector. Although I will tell you, a lot of those CEOs are also actually taking action themselves and are making big, bold, brave bets that are actually proving to add to their competitiveness. Now here on biodiversity, and I quoted it earlier, but I'm going to quote it again. Interestingly, only 21% of 1,200 CEOs, including 426 from the Global South, so we made a very specific effort to include the Global South, only 21% said that they believed that biodiversity was a direct risk to their business, which I'm going to be honest, surprised me. Yeah. Right? And I think maybe speaks to this lack of awareness challenge. I don't think there's anyone here who would doubt that there is a role for business and there's a need for systems change, and there are both risks and there are opportunities, as you and I were talking a second about, Marissa. So let me introduce a fantastic panel. Marissa Drew is Chief Sustainability Officer at Credit Suisse and the Global Head of the Sustainability Strategy, Advisory and Finance Group, and she's responsible for setting the strategy and ambition for the bank right across the board and on behalf of Credit Suisse Wealth Management, institutional and corporate clients. Daniel Schmidt is another good friend, Chief Sustainability Officer at SAP, and has been globally responsible for sustainability at SAP for 7 years, since 2014. And he started his career in CRM consulting and held various senior positions in consulting and at SAP before joining the sustainability leadership team. And Marco van der Rieve is the Executive Director for Development and Principal Gifts for the Nature Conservancy. In Latin America, the Nature Conservancy in Latin America, and formerly has been in multiple roles, including WBCSD and other areas. And he leads a multidisciplinary team that includes development, volunteer leadership, public policy and government relations, and marketing and communication. So very focused on Latin America. So let's start off, I think, Marissa, with you. So having lived 3 years in China, for anyone who speaks Chinese, the Chinese symbol for for opportunity has risk and opportunity embedded in the same symbol and can be used in different ways depending how you look at it.
Yeah.
So from a financial services perspective, tell us a little bit about what you think the risks are as you think about that as an investor, but also tell us what you think some of the examples of opportunity you're seeing are.
Well, just like the Chinese symbol, we think of it as two sides of the coin. Because as investors, you are seeking risk-adjusted returns. So you have to look at the risk side. Also, that leads you then hopefully to opportunities to generate returns through your investing habits. So on the risk side, of course, I think it's pretty obvious. We had this very, very stark example of physical risk. So our buildings, our commercial property, our farms are all at risk from biodiversity loss, whether it's because they're going to be more exposed to fires or flooding or what have you. That's pretty straightforward. But there's systems risks that drive whole economies. So think about most developing economies. One of their primary sources of GDP or their economic growth is through agriculture.
Yes.
That is deeply, deeply at risk with water shortages and also some of these other physical risks we talked about. But that is systems risk that is going to affect all of us. If you look at how stressed the oceans are, and I am a 100% groupie of Enrique, and we do work together. So, by the way, there's a lot of similarity here because we also do a huge amount of work with the TNC, which I can talk about as well. So we're all, I think, very, very much mission aligned. But oceans are deeply stressed. Oceans feed a quarter of the world's population, and yet, we've overfished. Oceans also sequester a quarter of the world's carbon and give us, every second breath we say of our oxygen. So, this is now not only systems risk and economic risk, it is also human health risk. So that is a whole nother area of risk because if you think about as well, where do we get our medicines from? It's from plants and it's from the bottom of the ocean. So we go on and on and on, but it is vast. So that's the negative bit.
Yes.
On the positive side, as an institution, we have committed to take biodiversity into consideration in all of our lending and underwriting capital. Now, the minute we put that pledge out there, it's led us to think about the opportunity side of that equation because you evaluate everything with a biodiversity lens. So we started then down the path of saying, how do we, with our platforms, our resources, get involved in changing the equation on biodiversity? A couple of examples, and you're very much aligned in this way. Awareness raising. We've got deep research teams that look at things through a financial lens. As an example, we just put out a piece, which I love the name. It's called the ROE of a tree. And it really tries to translate what is the cost benefit of investing in tree planting as an example, or just general nature. But then on financings, so financial opportunities. And here's where the partnership with the TNC comes in. On Friday, we were pleased, after many years of work through COVID, very difficult, the largest debt for nature swap ever by a factor of, 10 or something times.
What does that mean? Just so
yes, I'll translate that into non-financial crypto speak. Basically, what we have done is taken the island nation of Belize, which was very stressed, and it is very much dependent on tourism, and obviously with COVID, that was catastrophic for the country. So the country was having trouble servicing its debts. So we, together with the Nature Conservancy, went to Belize and said, we would like to help you restructure your debts, reduce your debt burden, and push out maturities in return for a commitment to take a portion of the proceeds and invest in marine conservation. So a very big deal, and the Nature Conservancy will be the steward of an endowment that we underwrote as Credit Suisse, $365 million to put it back into marine conservation. Win-win.
Right. I mean, that makes complete sense, and that's surely something that we should be doing around the world, and also with underwriting partnerships between government and business. Right?
And this is we talk about blended finance, which is a mystical term and people have a hard time getting their head around it. It's when you bring unnatural actors together in the same structure or the same project. In this instance, we had an NGO, a financial services provider, a government, and then on top of that, we had a wrapper from the US government, the Development Finance Corporation, to help enhance the credit rating of the country to allow investors who otherwise couldn't participate to take that political risk off the table. So it's a beautiful example of what would otherwise have been unnatural actors coming together and unlocking hurdles which would have prevented the ability to invest in marine conservation.
I apologise about the flies. I don't know if that's a message
the good news
from...
is we're pollinating with those trees.
Is that a message from nature? Right, it's a message from nature. Marco, so you've obviously been not on the other side, if you like, but you've been part of that transaction. And I think both, it'd be interesting to hear your view of how that helps you to address some of the issues that the Nature Conservancy is trying to address. But also, we still don't have international standards and regulations to structure these deals right. They're still basically based on relationships and innovation and co-creation, rather than being able to be repeated lots and lots of times. So what about international regulation standards? How can that help as well? Those two questions.
Good. Well, thank you first of all for being here. And I think the example you're giving is a great way of actually how you actually address an issue with as a systemic issue with all the different multi-stakeholders that are involved. And the total value of the swap was $550 million US. So it's a huge amount of money for us.
Is that a huge amount compared to Belize's overall debt?
For a small country,
it is.
Yes, very much so.
I think it's 30% of the total.
It's a material part of the debt.
Yeah. And that results in 30% ocean protection in the country, and as well the country not only having an endowment to be able to perpetually continue to finance conservation action, as well as taking action on policy levels within the country to deal with those issues. So building that multi-stakeholder systemic approach, I think, is very important. On the terms of standards and rules about this, but also in general about business and nature, you already mentioned the announcement that was done last week of the IFRS coming together,
which is seismic, I think.
Yeah.
I really think it's as big for me, and not to interrupt. I think it's as big for me for business in disclosing and reporting with one single standard body as the NDCs were, and the climate commitments made in Paris that could be tracked and traced and reported. It's as big for business, I think.
Yeah, it's the well. There's another side to it. I would like to highlight. I used to work for the Global Reporting Initiative, as you might know, which is the other big global reporting framework for this. So I think it's very good what's happening. I think there's getting clarity in that sense on reporting. The IFRS is really focusing on what is the financial materiality of nature inside the company, which is very important. And I think it's equally important to look at what is the impact of business
which is
on
what
nature.
GRI does.
Is what GRI and the GSSB does.
Absolutely.
So both are equally important. And if you're looking at what's happening in Europe at this moment under the Green Deal, and I think it's interesting to look, because I've been working on development sustainability for 25 years, and I did my thesis on biodiversity as a political scientist in 1995, and every biologist was saying, why are you interested as a political scientist in biodiversity? But I think it's very important. Ursula von der Leyen is speaking now in a way that environmentalists in the 90s would speak about the Green Deal and about nature and about how business and nature are totally integrated. And if you look at what the European EFRAG is called, is doing in developing the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive that's going to be approved next year, they're very much looking at how can business be transparent about all the impact, as well as understanding the impact of all the sustainability issues on themselves. And that will lead to,
you're thinking the EU taxonomy, the corporate disclosure reporting,
it's a whole package of all these
asset
things
manager
together,
standards,
due diligence processes and human rights, etc. So, but that will lead to 50,000 companies in Europe having to report on these issues as of the 1st of January 2023. So this is a very rapid process, and that's what I think is also positive news to seeing here at COP. If you see how business is very, and I think the point you made earlier, business seems to even walk ahead of a lot of governments. Business would like to have a clear pathway of policy in the future, and it's necessary to be said, but companies are already taking action, and we work with many companies globally to actually do those kind of things.
Well, that is a brilliant segue, because, I think so first of all, I agree with everything you've said, and I think there's a sample bias in that 1,200 CEO study that we did, right? Which is they had to be members of the Global Compact and they had to be prepared to either respond or be interviewed, right? So there is a sample bias, and I still think there are a group of companies that are way ahead of governments, right? And actually are wanting to collaborate and wanting to create the level playing field. There's a group of companies that are just frankly woefully behind, and there's a group somewhere in the middle, right? And I used to say it was a third, just for the sake of argument. I think it's probably changing for the better, but I think 50,000 companies in Europe suddenly having to report a lot of these things is a big wake-up call, as is, I think, the IFRS. Now, that leads nicely to you, Daniel. So, you are a huge player in software development and basically help to manage most of the world's sort of top companies' enterprise management and information systems and reporting systems. You're also a big business yourself. What does biodiversity mean for SAP? How do you go about practically interpreting that in terms of your organization, but also in your product and service?
Yeah, we need to start by ourselves. Yeah, having that ambition with the continuity on our journey to be perceived as a thought leader and front runner when it comes to our own operations. Only by doing that, we learn a lot and we gain the credibility to embed these learnings in our solution portfolio, helping our customers, and having more than 400,000 customers in each industry and sectors. That is the real impact. But let me start first what we are doing internally. So based on our ambition when it comes to, and climate change and biodiversity are heavily connected, as you mentioned before. So having that ambition to be carbon neutral by 2023, we follow a three-pillar approach to avoid emissions, to reduce emissions, and to compensate. So we introduced, as an example, back in 2016, an internal price on carbon. So whenever a colleague from SAP is sitting in a plane, Daniel gets money. And that empowers me and my team to purchase nature-based solutions, carbon offsets, nature-based solutions, in order to invest in the gold standard. We are for many, many years a partner of the Livelihoods Fund. We are now a member of the LEAF Coalition. We are now a member of the 1T.org organization with a pledge to plant 21 million trees now. So this is part of our own journey internally. And here we learn a lot in order to embed sustainability now in our data models, in our business processes. We have that unique advantage to have these deep industry insights and business process insights. And think about industries like agriculture, like construction, like mining, being quite intense when it comes to biodiversity. Helping them with making informed decisions, having the data at their hands at the point of the decision. That makes a huge, huge difference. And one final comment on that one, Peter, we could say, and by the way, we are doing that in great partnership with you, with Accenture, yeah, to co-develop. But we could say, oh, let's lean back. Our systems are used for decades to manage the material flows and to manage the financial flows. But with efficiency alone, we will not solve our societal and environmental challenges. So we need to do business differently. And that is why sustainability is such a strong innovation driver. And think about circular economy, where we need to think in business networks to even overcome industry boundaries and to collaborate. So we have now great solutions in place to help our customers to deal with these big challenges.
And I'll maybe say a few words about it in a second, but before we do that, could you ever imagine, and I'm not putting you on the spot, so you don't have to make a public commitment, but could you imagine, we've had internal carbon trading systems for quite a long time, certainly in the oil and gas industries, the heavy industries, chemicals, less so in software and technology. That's, I think, more innovative. Could you imagine an internal tax on biodiversity and on nature over time? Could you imagine that same kind of system being used to be able to tackle some of those issues?
I'm with you, Peter. In general, we need to apply the learnings out of 500 old accounting systems to apply this as well to the non-financial world. Yeah?
By the way, I just sprung that on Daniel. I didn't think of that beforehand. But it's more of a because there's no reason in principle why it shouldn't be possible.
Yeah, right. And we could apply the learnings why budgets make sense or why tax could make sense, pricing.
Capital projects. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you're looking at already.
You're indirectly doing it anyway. If we're saying we're taking that into consideration in lending decisions, we are proactively saying if somebody is not biodiversity sensitive, we're going to have a hard time lending.
Yeah. Well, I don't know I think what you're really saying is you're expecting that the company or the government is doing this properly, and actually, that's an imperative that you're asking of them if you're lending decisions.
Or we will finance and help the journey, right? Because the other thing is there's the already there folks, which we love, but we also have to help people along that journey, and that costs money. So we need to help them invest.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, to follow up on Daniel's point, I think one of the things that I'm very proud of is the work that we're doing with SAP. So we talk about climate change and biodiversity needing to be treated at the same. And you obviously launched your C20. And look, with services businesses like ours, we have 626,000 people working for essentially about, well, 70% of the top 2,000 corporations in the world. It's not like your business that gets into 400,000 into the supply chain. But really, what we need to be doing is getting our own shop in order. But really, the biggest difference we can make is what we do with our partners for our clients, right? That's what changes the economy. And so when Daniel's organization CEO and Jan Gilg, who runs all of the software, launched Climate 21, what we also launched in parallel was the circular economy set of modules that will look at the supply chain, which is, I think, part of, if not all, of the solution, thinking about circular economy, energy, water, waste, materials, biodiversity, how that impacts oceans and forests and land use. That is, I think it's a good, practical business framework. I would say that. I mean, I have written books on the topic, right? But I do genuinely think it's a good way of not treating climate as separate and divorced from other areas of business. And I'm proud of the partnership we've got. As far as I'm aware, so far, the only partnership in technology and software.
Peter, allow me two additional remarks here. One is having robust methodologies in place, how to measure the impact of your business activities on nature, our environment, and on our society, and putting a euro next to it, that makes a huge difference. That is why we are a founding member of the Value Balancing Alliance, as an example, to do exactly that, coming up with a robust methodology and adding this to the old classical accounting systems that would not only support the challenge of fulfilling all the regulation and you mentioned the EU taxonomy, which is quite a challenge for many, many companies, including ourselves, with all the details. But as well, based on that, that would allow to make fact-based, informed decisions. And that is what is needed, where you need data consistency across the entire value chain and connecting these dots. And one beautiful element of our business case, and I'm looking here to you, is that, and that is why my boss, I report directly to Luka Mucic, our CFO, who is the board sponsor at SAP for sustainability, which is a cross-topic. But of course, he likes that part of the business case because 10 years back, we had 5.6% of the so-called socially responsible investors community being invested in SAP shares. This is now 38.2%. And we love these investors because they are more mid- and long-term oriented. So that is another element to see the beautiful business
part
case
of long-term capital. Listen, there's flashing red lights at me as a moderator. So I'm going to give you all 30 seconds to close with what your ask would be of you, either any ask, actually, but that you think would truly help speed up and scale business action on diversity. So we'll start with you.
Well, I think what TNC has been doing for decades is working on nature-based solutions. And I think integrating nature-based solutions into business practices, and I think that's what we're talking about. We can start dealing with all the externalities that Enrique was mentioning, and then how can you measure it is the next step. But I think doing it is really the first step. And 35% of climate change and emissions problems can be solved through nature-based solutions. So that's a big step. And also, if you think about it, and there's a figure you mentioned earlier, 55% of global GDP that Swiss Re said that in the report is dependent on biodiversity. So looking at the word cloud, water, food, air, well-being is linked to nature.
Mental, physical health.
So we really need to bring nature together in nature-based solutions for businesses.
Thank you very much.
Well, from a finance point of view, to allow capital to scale, investors need to have confidence that their dollar is delivering the outcomes. And so my ask would be for even more participation of NGOs who really deeply understand, because this is complex stuff, by industry, what are the one or two things that really matter for every industry? And they'll be different for every industry, because if then we said, rather than just, because a company can't solve for 50 things, they've got to run their company.
Yep.
So it's CO2 emissions and one or two other material things. Then we could disclose those line items along these standards. Then capital can make informed decisions about who's doing it best and where it matters. And then we're now getting the whole systems flowing from finance to companies to the civil society and nonprofit sector. I think that would be my ask.
And my strong sense from my conversation with investors, and you're
getting there.
closer, the money's there.
The money wants to invest. It
not
just
that
needs
there's-
to know how
Exactly.
and under what basis.
And to
understand that those outcomes are being delivered.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And reassured that that's
Exactly.
measurable and quantifiable and comparable
And meaningful.
and meaningful. Daniel.
My key message is don't go for a sustainability strategy or biodiversity strategy. Go for a business strategy where this is embedded. That's number one. Number two, be bold and ambitious. Number three, do it in a way that you start with very concrete, focused initiatives and allow for innovation. And of course, we are super happy at SAP and together with you from Accenture if they use our solutions to overcome these business challenges, like responsible design and production, which is now.
I'm completely unapologetic about that. If we think that capitalism is going to work, then we need to offer the services and the solutions and embed it in our existing services. It's just like financial services, professional services, software, and every other business. You know, it has to make economic sense.
nature services.
And nature services. I like that. I like that. It's a good addition to catch. So, I think, let me wrap up our session here today. Thank you very much all for joining. Thank you very much to my panelists. I think another wonderful element of the trilogy I think that we went through today with Enrique as a true pioneer in terms of what he's been doing with oceans and with nature, hearing firsthand from Divi on what the consequences are, but also some of the optimism about how some of the solutions can be there for people who have really lost everything as a result of and the need to preserve their knowledge and their cultures, but also the fact that we can make this practical, we can make this a business issue. But I also want to finish with a very important note of realism. 21% of CEOs believing that their business is at risk from biodiversity is frankly absurd. Right? That means that CEOs simply haven't understood yet, or boards and executives haven't yet understood the massive importance of biodiversity. As you rightly pointed out, Marco, you know, more than 50% of the global economy depends on that biodiversity, and our livelihoods, our well-being, and the future well-being of our children and our children's children depend on it. And I think, importantly, it's very clear climate change cannot be tackled without tackling biodiversity at the same time. They have to be integrated. They have to be something that is truly tackled in one framework, one system. Circular economy is one way of looking at that. There are others. But it needs to be part of tackling the broader sustainable development goals. Now, once again, as I mentioned earlier, we have the Get Nature Positive campaign. We would love you to join that campaign. We would love you to download. I don't know if you can buy the handbook. I presume it's just free. But go and download the handbook. It's incredibly practical with what it is that people can do. Not sure if that comes up next. Okay. Well, it is very practical, I can assure you. And there are 4 very, very clear steps that boards and top executives can take. And with that, thank you all for joining digitally. Thank you for joining physically. Thank you to my panelists and speakers. And let's act now on biodiversity as part of the broader climate change action agenda here at COP26 in Glasgow this week. Thank you.